Hi Brittany, I thought it would be easier for me just to make a quick video to show you a suggested method of doing this. Now, this is not the only way of doing it, I suppose, making the rigged knee work. It's kind of a hack or a workaround, but since your character only has to do straight knee bends, it's not a really complicated character. This can sort of easily solve the problem without having to really generate anything new. So you can see here I've got just a simple leg setup that the femur and the tibia aren't touching here, and you can see that um, they're lined up along the joint. So if we just take a look at the setup here, we've got typical leg setup. I've got the reverse foot control down here. These circles are the toes. I just started making toes while I was thinking about this, so don't worry too much about this. But here's the reverse foot down here. So, we're moving the heel, which is moving the leg, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't really matter. But what does matter is how you connect your thigh geometry or your femur geometry and your tibia geometry to the joint system. Now, you can do this in one of two ways. You can either constrain the thigh to the hip joint using, a constraint command, a parent constraint or something. And that's how I was first doing it, because I thought we could use that constraint to change the orientation of the femur. I call it thigh here. I'll call this femur just to make this clear. I'll call this tibia. So if we want to change the orientation of the femur, just so it's not colliding with the tibia, I thought using a constraint could do that. I ran into a couple of problems. So I did the other way of attaching these bones, the femur. So this geometry, it's all bones here, but so attaching this geometry to this joint. And I did it just as a parent. So I just middle mouse dragged the femur onto the hip, and now it is a child. I made sure, though, that my axis of rotation was at the same point as the axis of rotation of the joint system, right? So the joint rotates up here and the femur also rotates up here. Same thing for the tibia. If I select it, you can see the position of the manipulators there. Okay, so what's happening here? Well, if we grab the foot and move up to the group, and if I rotate, or if I move the foot up, which forces the knee to rotate, you can see something happening here. The femur is rotating off of the joint. When I go back down, you can see it rotates back in. So that's the set-driven key at work here, so I don't have to do this separately. Now, hopefully this would solve your problem, but if it doesn't, you can take this technique, think about it, and try and apply it in a different way. But I wouldn't overthink it. I would make something that works well enough and move on. But just let's see how the set-driven key is set up here. So I'm going to undo to get back down here. So I want to do a set-driven key between the rotation of the knee and the rotation of the femur geometry. Okay? There's other ways I'm sure you could do this, but this struck me as a simple way. So when you want to do a set-driven key, you can select the knee, just the knee joint here, and find the attribute that we want to set the key on. In this case, it's the rotate Z. So I can right-click and say set driven key. Actually, this should be the driver. So I'm going to load this as the driver. So the rotation of the knee is the driver. The rotation of the femur is the driven. Now I've already done this, so let me do it again. So you can see I've already done it, so I'm going to break the connection here. So this is, I wasn't really careful about this. I should have zeroed out these rotations and stuff before I did any of this. But anyway, so this is the rotation of the femur geometry. So if I just select, I'm going to copy this tab out here. So if I just select the femur and go into rotation mode, you can see if I rotate Z here, you can see it's changing over here. So that's the one that I want to set the driven key on. Okay, so actually I'll set driven key on this one. You can do it either way, but if I right click and say set driven key, this is the driven attribute, and then the driver is the rotation of the knee. So we'll load driver. And the knee will rotate about Z, and so will the femur. So in this rest position, when the foot is just standing here, we can key, right? So that means the rotation of the femur is what it is now, 80.538, when the rotation of the knee joint is what it is, which is also 80.538. So now I'm going to select the foot and just move the knee into an extreme position. So you can see we're getting this kind of overlap that we don't want here, this intersection. So now I'll just select the femur and rotate it out of the way about just a single axis. So I'll make sure I'm just using Z, and just enough so it's not intersecting, whatever is necessary. And then I'll key it again. So now you can see it's keyed at a slightly different value, 83.767. So now if I select the foot, go back down to the rest position, it's back to the normal rotation as I go up. The rotation of this joint is driving the rotation of this piece of geometry. So this geometry is being driven by two things actually right now. It's being driven because it's a child of the hip joint, but then I'm adding some extra rotation based on the rotation of the knee. Okay? And then hopefully that will work. And it won't go beyond that point. But when I go down, so you can see I'm not getting any intersection here. At first I was actually trying this. The first way I tried this was to oops. Let me redo. The first way I was trying this was actually to scale the joint to push out the tibia, but then I was running some other problems. But that's another way you could think about doing it. So imagine if you scaled the hip joint out, it would push this joint forward, taking the tibia with it. Now I ran into some problems because it forced the femur to also scale when it was a child. So I used a constraint without a scale portion. I used the parent constraint, and that sort of worked, but it wasn't quite what I wanted. So yeah, I think that's it. It's a kind of a hacky workaround, but it works. So a lot of the time, that's that's all you can ask for, right? So try and implement something like this, and frame out your shots. Like, how much can you see? How much can't you see? How much can you solve just by not showing, right? So I think this should work because you've still got to get it to the point where you're adding the muscles, right? So you want to solve this quickly as you can. Okay, so if you have any other questions, feel free to ask me, and I'll respond as soon as I can. I'm a little tied up with administrative stuff right now, but I will respond when I can. If you want to set up a meeting, just email me. Okay, thanks.